Good morning. Hope you're doing well. It's a new week. It's Monday, the 17th of August. So, outlook for the week. Quick note Jungle, I'm sort of rethinking about how to manage joining going forward. So, it's kind of semi suspended, but thank you to TXFlow for sponsoring the stream. If you want to show your support, consider signing up using the link in the description. There is a month's membership available at the Jungle. If you do so, just deposit, make a trade, send me a DM and we can sort that out. So yeah, thanks to them for once again sponsoring the stream. And let's get in to the outlook. Okay, so we'll talk about this chart in a moment. We'll do Bitcoin in a lot of detail, and then just look at some other stuff on a sort of less thorough basis. So we'll start with our long-term VWAPs. So weekly VWAPs, monthly, quarterly, yearly. So on the week, we've got a lot of overlapping value in terms of previous weeks. We know that. Last week was really quite bearish. We tested previous week's VWAP a couple of times and were basically capped at weekly VWAP all through previous week, as we have been again today. So far today, I would say that's a bearish development on the weekly, given that we've failed at previous week's VWAP here, which has obviously capped price for the past 6 or 7 days. So bearish development there on the week. The month is neutral bearish, overlapping months as well. We haven't been able to get above previous month's value high. We haven't yet traded into previous month's value low. We've been capped at previous month's VWAP this morning, confluent with previous weeks, and we're below the developing month's VWAP. So again, everything's looking relatively bearish on the monthly, given this rejection this morning. The quarterly is looking pretty bad as well. We are rejecting off previous quarter's val. So there's a lot of VWAP overlap in this area, which we've rejected from this morning. So previous quarter's val and quarterly VWAP as well, we've almost tagged to the tick here. So again, I would say the quarterly is bearish. And on the yearly, we've been unable to get back above 2024's VWAP. We're sort of compressing at the edge of value here. The acceptance picture is not clear. We're just sort of chopping around the edge of yearly value low. Doesn't look really particularly good. And given that we failed again to get above 2024's VWAP, my expectation really is that we probably trade in towards 50k in 2024's value low based on yearly VWAP alone, right? So there is a quarterly level somewhere down here. At 57k, I believe. Yeah, this naked quarterly value low around 56, 57. But overall, based on the yearly alone, we can probably anticipate a move towards 2024's value low around 50k. So really, everything in terms of long-term VWAP looks pretty bearish. There's no real sign of any bullishness here at the moment. We would need to see a shift above 65 to 66k being, this area of overlap between previous month's value high and 2024's VWAP for anything really definitively bullish to materialize. Based on VWAP, my summary is universally bearish. There's no real signs of bullishness here at all. So that's all I have to say in terms of long-term VWAPs. TPO wise, the most important thing in terms of the TPO is this multi-week composite that we formed. So we now have 7 weeks of overlapping value between 63k and 65k. We have not been able to find any acceptance above that, and we are now sort of chopping around the lower extremity of this value. The other thing I would say about this profile, we'll come to the main chart now. We talked about the importance of this point of control, right? This level here at 63.9k. We talked about this a few weeks ago. If we lost that from here, it's really the bullish line in the sand. We lost it, and we have not been able to accept back above. So we got some rejections off, at this area of overlap. And since then, this point of control has capped us. So there's a lot of positioning, which is just, leading to selling as we come into these areas. Basically, we have heavy supply above 63.8k. We also have this 4 weeks of value we printed from the 31st of July here, right? So we got above that, traded up. We've now accepted back within that, and today, given that a bearish retest, confluent with those levels we just talked about in terms of previous week, quarterly value low, or previous quarter's value low rather. So, plenty of resistance here. And really, given that we've failed at this value high, we should be anticipating a move towards at least this value low. And I think this move is just being drawn out and taking a long time. So everything to me is pointing towards at least 61k here. The other thing I would say here in terms of how bearish this looks is just with reference to the rolling VWAPs. So the 7-day VWAP has been capping upside, is now back below the 30, and the 90 is really still pointing down. So the trend structure is bearish as well. So there's really nothing bullish about this chart right now, and it's not looking good, right? It's really not looking good to me at all. I think the probability that we put in another leg down on this basis is very high. But potentially we could reassess at 61k, assuming we trade into there. But overall, yeah, it's not looking great right now. And a sort of more sort of discretionary point is that we've seen so many bearish signals this past week or so in terms of the kind of coins that have caught a bid. So I really think that another some sort of leg down is probably imminent. Whether we get a leg of forced selling into 50k or 56 ends up capping downside, I really have no idea. We did talk about this momentum loss on the high time frame. It has rounded out a bit, but that doesn't mean we can't get another leg down. So it's not looking good. I think we will see another leg down personally, based on the way everything's looking. I would have your wits about you this week, and the stream is frozen, so apologies for that. Let me just come back and just look at that higher time frame view. All right, so if I look at the 3-day, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago, just in terms of how this is rounded out in terms of the momentum loss, but the trend is still very much to the downside. So as I say, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that we get another leg of forced selling into potentially 50k. The first place I would probably look at, assuming we make new lows, would be this 56k, and if we end up forming some kind of tight consolidation here, right? So let's just say hypothetically I'm correct on this, we get some kind of leg down here. If we sort of consolidate here in a tight range, then I would expect another leg down from there. So we'll see how things play out. I don't want to be sort of super bearish at this stage of what is presumed to be a bear market before we start trading up again. On the other hand, there's really nothing here which sort of suggests that we should be bullish yet. So I'm more than happy to be looking for shorts. And in terms of setups in BTC, potentially this was a good short this morning. If we get back below 63k and give that an underside retest, potentially a short there. If we trade below this 4-day composite low, which gave us a nice reaction here on Friday, then potentially there's a breakdown short to be taken there. Or you could just take a breakdown short below 61k, I think. There's going to be opportunities to get into a short, assuming I'm right on this leg down. I would not change my bias unless we got above the point of control here at 63.9. At that point, it starts to look a bit better for bulls, but even then, 65k, 66k is still an important resistance. So I think things are pointing down. It's not looking great, and that's about it really. So I was just going to say, in terms of like clear setups, I think potentially this was one this morning, and that may even be the high of the day or the week. I wouldn't rule that out. It makes sense if we are about to start a downtrend, and given the current condition that we don't trade above this 4-day composite high. So that may well be it, right? That may well be it. I'm not in a short on BTC. I'd rather trade alts, to be honest, anyway, in terms of trading to the downside. That said, it may have been a clean entry. I think that's about it for BTC. I don't think there's much else to add here, so I will probably move on. And it may well actually be a relatively quick outlook this week because I don't want to talk about too much. So we will let's look at Hype. So kind of looking quite good, I would say. I really thought that we could see lower prices from here, right? We traded below value. We've got this reaction here. I thought this might be it, but we traded back into the 7-day VWAP, swept into this low, into this imbalance in demand, and we obviously started to trade up again. So ended up taking a little long here, which I've closed out, coming to that 5-day composite high. It doesn't look terrible. certainly, right, we're back inside value. So is this just going to be a deviation of value, and can this trade up from here? I don't think that's beyond the realms of possibility. So, I hope that I'm wrong and we do trade lower, but as it stands, I don't necessarily expect us to. So it's kind of a bit of a difficult situation for me personally, because I was planning on buying down this area, but that may not come. So any kind of, if we get a retest, for example, around this value high overlapping with the broader composite lows, that may well be an interesting area to look to bid around 56. That's probably my preferred option at the moment. We do have this kind of imbalance here as well. So yeah, 56, 57 might be a good retest if we get that dip. I'll set an alert there. Big resistance potentially around, well, there is resistance here, right? We're at yearly value high. We obviously tested this composite high. So we are at resistance, but kind of starting to look like it wants to curl up again. 7 about to cross 30. These starting to point up. 90 is still pointing up. Trend structure is not looking too bad. Momentum loss below value is not too bad. Reclaiming that value is not too bad. So overall, I'd say it looks pretty good. Potentially support at 58. 5-day composite low, old 8-day composite low, potentially support of 57 if that's lost. Below that, I'm wrong, it's probably going lower. So yeah, I would say hype looks pretty good overall, quite encouraging. That can't be said for much else in terms of sort of the majors. ETH, I don't really want to talk about too much. Sol, I thought looked like it could catch a bid, just given the way it's been trading relative to these rolling VWAPs, but they are pointing down, and we've got this failure to reclaim this 7 days so far today. So unless I want to see a clear flip of that 7-day value low if I'm going to take a long on this. I think we could see Sol squeeze. It often does squeeze before we get significant unwinds on BTC. Not to say it has to happen. So my plan for Sol, very simply, would be, my bullish plan for Sol, at least near term, we need to see that 7-day value low reclaimed. Any kind of retest then can look straight up to potentially previous month's value high, given that previous month's value low here is holding support. So we are at the moment rotational within the previous month's value, i.e. between 75 and sort of 80. So that would be a logical target, filling out this gap. Otherwise, if we lose this high volume node here, right, that probably points to this going lower and us coming back into at least this 55 area. So no momentum, pretty neutral at the moment. Wouldn't rule out a squeeze higher, but by the same token, it's at resistance here and failing so far. So I think it still has potential to squeeze, but it's not a certain thing by any means. The stream's frozen again. Okay. Let's move on and just talk about Pump, which I think is just topped actually. So I was long, took profit at this value high, right? And then we've essentially printed 3 drives into these highs, which has also just come into this area of supply. So for me, particularly given the way this leg materialized this morning, i.e. on a lot of fresh perps aggression with no participation on the spot side, this really does point to this being a top, I think. Wouldn't really be totally confirmed unless we get momentum below this value low. So we've obviously got a week or so of value printed here. Assuming this is the top, once we break below this, it's well and truly done. And I think in that instance we're looking significantly lower, potentially back into this kind of area. I think it is topped personally. Any kind of retest of the imbalance we've left behind today might be a good short if you're not already in. Otherwise, below value highs or below value lows is probably a decent entry as well. And I think we'll leave it there for today. So quite a quick one, but it's relatively straightforward, isn't it? It's pretty, I would say it's unequivocal. Like Bitcoin looks like absolute death. The only possible bullish thing that we can say at the moment is that we're trading back above this 7-week value low. But this is not, something to lean on too heavily, given that it's a relatively long-term level. And Therefore, it's going to potentially take a little bit of time for the exceptions picture to become clear around this value low. I think there are pockets of upside at the moment, like Sirit, for example, gave a nice retest of previous month's value low earlier. So, previous month's value high, logical upside target on that basis, which will take us into this area of supply and this imbalance. So that, there are still things to trade to the long side, but yeah, it's not looking great overall. We'll leave it there, guys. I'll speak to you in the next one. Thanks again to TX Flow. Check out the jungle, and I'll chat to you later. Cheers for now.